SB 23, first reading.
Flag and Coat of Arms Act Cap F 30 LFN 2004, Amendment Bill 2019 SB 23, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the fifth business of the day is the presentation of a bill standing in the name of Senator Emmanuel Boacha on the Federal University Wukari Establishment, etc. Bill 2019. Mr. President, we wish to invite the Clerk of the Senate to read the short title of the bill.
Clerk of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished senators, Federal University Wukari Establishment Extra Bill 2019, SB 24, first reading.
Federal University Wukari Establishment Extra Bill 2019, SB 24, first reading taken. Leader of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues. The first order of the day is the presentation and consideration of the report of the Committee on Finance and National Planning on 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. Distinguished senators will recall that the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, on 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper was referred to the committee on 26 September 2019. Mr. President, you may wish to invite Senator Olamilekan Adeola Solomon to move the motion for the Senate to receive and consider the report of the committee.
Distinguished Senator Adeola Olamilekan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Adeola Solomon Olamilekan, representing Lagos West Senatorial District. Mr. President, I move that this Senate do receive the report of the Joint Senate and May I move that the Senate do receive the report of the Joint Senate and the House of Representatives Committee on Finance on the 2020-2022 medium-term expenditure framework, MTEP, and fiscal strategic paper. Mr. President, I so move.
Distinguished Senator Olamilekan, you can lay your report. Just hold on, please. Hold on. The Deputy Minority Leader. Second.
Mr. President, very distinguished colleagues, may I second the motion that the report of the MTEP be laid up for consideration? I so second.
Those in support of the motion say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Please lay your report. You may present your report, please. But before then, let me also take this opportunity to appeal to our colleagues. This report is already a harmonized report with that of the House of Representatives. Our committees work together. We expect that the House will also take this report, receive and consider it. So I want to appeal to all my colleagues that we receive this report and we also consider it. I know the time given is very short and limited, but we are trying to see that we catch up with possible date of the budget presentation by the executive early next week. So I want to appeal, please, for your understanding. Thank you very much. Go ahead and present the report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleague, once more, Adeola Solomon Olamilekan, representing Lagos West Senatorial District. Mr. President, I present before the Senate the report of the Joint Committee on Finance on the 2020-2022 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTF, and Fiscal Strategic Paper. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, you will recall that the Senate and the House of Representatives at its sitting on Thursday, 26 September 2019, considered the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federation on the 2020-2022 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and the Fiscal Strategic Paper, and referred same to the relevant committees for further legislative action. Mr. President, 2.0 contained the background of pursuant to Sections 11 and all other Fiscal Responsibility Act. If you go to 3.0, membership of the committee is contained. From there, we go to 4.0, the methodology that was adopted for the consideration of the MTF document and the fiscal strategic paper, and also the list of agencies of government that were invited to appear before the committee for the consideration, and other documents that were consulted or used for the purpose of this consideration. And if you go there, you have the budget review, which has to do with the review of 2019 budget, which was given in a summarized form, and also the revenue inflows and performance for 2019 to date is contained on page 6. On page 7, we have the expenditure outturn for 2019 to date, which has to do with how far the government has been able to defray some of the expenditure as contained in the Appropriation Act of 2019. Mr. President, very distinguished colleague, in 6.0, page 8 precisely, I have the medium-term expenditure framework, MTF, and the fiscal strategic paper. And we want to put this into a summarized from that. Following the successful deployment of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan 2017 to 2020 ERGP to restore the Nigerian economy to the path of growth, the 2020-2022 MTF FSP will signal the direction of government priorities and programs to accelerate growth, diversification, and social inclusion. 6.1 contains the fiscal strategy for 2022 and 2020-2022, and all the indicators, assumptions upon which the fiscal strategy and the FSP is predicated upon is listed in 6.1. In 6.3, we have the summary of 2020 revenue generation and the expenditure framework of the federal government, clearly stated in a summarized form. I will want to go from there to 7.0, which is page 10, and contain the findings of the committee. I start with 1, the crude oil. The crude oil receipts account for 50% of the federal government revenue and about 90% of the Nigerian foreign exchange earnings. Therefore, crude oil production and export will continue to have important implications on the federal fiscal operation. Over the last 3 years, crude oil production averaged 1.92 million per barrel. However, following consultation with stakeholders, crude oil production is estimated at 2.18 million per barrel, 2.2 million per barrel, and 2.3 million per barrel in 2020, 2021, and 2022. 2, it is noted that the oil prices has generally been rising since April 2016. Burning light crude oil price rose from an average of $43 per barrel in 2016 to 56.2 in 2017 and 72.1 in 2018, partly due to geographical tension. In 2019, burning light crude oil price increased steadily from January average of $60 per barrel, a 6 years high, well above $70 per barrel between April and May 2019. It is noteworthy that the volatility of crude oil market and fluctuating prices require constant review and forecast. 3, the non-oil revenue for 2020-2022 MTEP is budgeted to be as follows: 1.8 trillion for 2020, 2.2 trillion for 2021, and 2.3 trillion for 2022. 4. The committee observed during the public hearing on the 2020-2022 MTEF and FSP that the salaries and remuneration for the proposed recruitment of 30,000 personnel in police, army, immigration, and civil defense was not captured. 5. The total VAT proposed in 2020-2022 MTEF FSP document accounting to 2.3 trillion can only be realized after the amendment of the finance bill is passed into law by the National Assembly, most especially as it affects the VATable items. 6. The committee frowned at the attitude of Central Bank of Nigeria for under-disclosure of the e-collection of stamp duties. 7. The committee also noted that 10 government-owned enterprise budget will be presented along the national budget. These government-owned enterprises include FAN, NCAA, NIMASA, NPA, NAMA, Shippers Council, NDIC, and National Communications Commission, NCC. 8. The committee observed that the activities of the NNPC as it relates to the cost of production is shrouded in secrecy, and the direct deduction of cost from revenue without recourse to relevant agency is unacceptable. 9. The committee observed that the exchange rate of 305 is maintained over the past 3 years, and also note that the GDP is currently standing at 2.93% and inflation rate of 10.81%. 10. The most of revenue-generating agencies have failed to comply with the relevant extant law of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which stipulates payment of 80% of the operational surplus to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. 11. The committee observed that the federal government is stepping up investment in health and education to fill the skill gap in the economy and meet the international targets set under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. The federal government is earmarking 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to finance the basic healthcare provision funds to be classified as a statutory transfer. Federal government believes that investing in people is a core objective of the ERGP. Government is taking steps to enhance human capital development, particularly in health, education, and social intervention programs in order to reduce poverty. 12. Based on the joint IMF World Bank debt sustainability framework, which has a debt GDP threshold of 56% for countries in Nigeria peer group, Nigeria debt is expected to remain sustainable within the MTEF period. This implies that Nigerian debt GDP ratio of 19.39% can afford it to expand its borrowing limit. And as at 31st December 2018, Nigerian public debt stock is valued at 24.387 trillion, representing $79.4 billion, rising at an average of 12.24% per annum. With regards to the 2020 fiscal year, the estimated budget deficit is 1.70 trillion, and it will largely be financed through borrowing, as it has been the tradition, while also additional financing of 252 billion will be derived from privatization profit and 328.13 billion from loans secured for specific developmental projects. The committee further observed that the Nigerian current debt profile is not as alarming as expressed in some quarters, but within the threshold of 3% as contained in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Recommendation. The committee recommends as follows. Following intensive engagement with NNPC and relevant information obtained during the session, the committee recommends the adoption of 2.18 million per barrel as the daily production output in 2020, in view of concerted effort by NNPC and security agency to combat the menace of oil theft, vandalization. The 2.18 million per barrel will be realizable. 2. The committee recommends the adoption of $57 per barrel as crude oil benchmark price for fiscal year 2020. 3. The revenue target of Nigerian Customs Service of 942.6 billion for 2020 should be increased to 1.5 trillion as a result of the performance of the Nigerian Customs Services in the last 9 months. With 3 months still outstanding, the Nigerian Customs Service revenue as at September stood at 1 trillion naira against the budgeted figure of 969 billion naira for the year 2019. The Joint Committee commends the Nigerian Customs Service for exceeding the targeted revenue despite the global economic challenge and closure of Nigerian borders. 4. The sum of 557.4 billion from the revenue increment of the National Customs Services be used to reduce borrowing by 200 billion and increase capital expenditure, thereby decreasing the size of the budget deficit from 1.7 trillion to 1.5 trillion, and also increase the total capital available to MDA by 357 billion from 1.01 trillion to 1.37 trillion. The exchange rate of 305 should be maintained for economic stability, while more work should be done by the Honorable Minister of Finance and all his economic advisor and a team on improving the economic growth by increasing the GDP and reducing the inflation rate to a single digit. 6. Savings on income accruing from the increase of the benchmark account amounting to 172 billion, which represent the federal government portion of the $2 added to the benchmark, be used to pay salaries and emolument of the proposed 30,000 new employees. 7. Proper investigation be carried out on the e-collection stamp duty domiciled with the Central Bank of Nigeria for the past year, so as to show probity and accountability, and of course increase the revenue base of the country. 8. Immediate amendment of the Nigeria Petroleum Act on the production sharing contract and the IOC. 9. Proper investigation be carried out on the NNPC so as to ascertain the actual costs associated with the joint ventures agreement. 10. More government-owned enterprise budget be added to the nation's budget to ensure proper checks, balances among the federal government agencies. 11. Debt Management Office should put more concerted effort and strategy in managing the foreign and the local debts. 12. The total expenditure of the federal government should be increased from 10.002 to 10.729.4 trillion. Page 13. National Assembly should expedite action on the passage of the finance bill, which will be brought alongside with the national budget into law for easy implementation of the 2020 budget, most especially in the area of VAT. 14. The committee calls for an urgent review and amendment to the Fiscal Responsibility Act and various laws of the revenue-generating agencies to align with the current realities. 15. The committee recommends earmarking 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to finance the basic healthcare provision to be classified as statutory transfer. 16. The committee recommends the adoption of 1.5 trillion as the amount for the new borrowing as a result of reduction of 200 billion, which was sourced from the increase of revenue target of the Nigerian Customs Services. However, borrowing must be project tied. In borrowing more, government must remain focused and ensure it uses it to fund critical projects that will increase the productivity and contribute to the financing of such debt. Conclusion. The Joint Committee of both chambers expressed appreciation to the leadership of the National Assembly and also thank the entire member of the committee and the secretariat who work assiduously to ensure timely submission of this report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Distinguished colleagues, we are going to start the debate or contributions, and I will take down the names of those senators who want to contribute. Let me invite Senator Gabriel Soswan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me recommend my friend Solomon. I saw that they worked throughout the night in making sure that we have this report. Mr. President, recommending him for work well done I want to state that, Mr. President, there are issues with the medium-term expenditure framework as presented by Solomon. Let me take first let's take page 12. Page 12, item 12. Based on the joint IMF World Bank debt sustainability framework, which was a debt GTV threshold of 56 for countries in Nigerian peer group. Mr. President, there's a problem with this. There's a problem because the debt profile, public debt profile of the country is 24 trillion. Now, Nigeria will take ourselves and compare ourselves with some of these small countries that live on donor contributions from donor countries and say that our debt sustainability profile should be moved to 56. What the Fiscal Responsibility Act of Nigeria provides is 25 as a threshold. Currently, we are about 19. Now, if we now give an excuse for us to continue to pile up debt, it means that this will not be sustainable. And Mr. President, I think that the Committee on Finance should critically examine this. This is presented by Ministry of Finance. And they're comparing Nigeria to countries probably like Sudan and saying that our debt sustainability threshold should be 56. Mr. President, public debt, like I said, is 24 trillion. If we continue to borrow the way they are putting it here, because it is an excuse to move it from 25, which is what our statutes provide in this country, to 56, make it unsustainable. And so I believe that the committee should critically look at that. Mr. President, also, if we look at this presentation, and you take this honorable colleague, this one, the figures, not the report, and you look at item 15, which is repayment of arrears. Mr. President, Nigeria has 6 major joint ventures outside of the local ones. Now, what has happened is that last year we had about 151 billion for repayment of the joint cash call. What this means is that in the joint ventures, we are not getting a dime. We've expended money. Joint ventures are contracts that is in partnership with NMPC on behalf of the federal government. Now, in those joint ventures, 6 of them, which are the major ones, if we are not raising any money and we continue to pay the joint cash call, there's a problem, Mr. President. Because if we continue in this manner, it means that the essence is defeated. We'll go into partnership with IOCs in order for us to raise money to finance our budget, and then we're not getting anything. All we are doing is that we're providing money in the budget for us to pay back those joint cash calls. Mr. President, I think this is also not sustainable. I think that the Committee on Finance should consider this as a very serious item that we should look into. We cannot invest in joint ventures and we're not getting anything. Rather, we're providing for appropriation for us to pay back those monies. I think there's a problem with that. Mr. President, having said that, we also look at what I raised yesterday, the production sharing contracts. If we look at production sharing contracts here, we've been shortchanged. It's the same thing, good enough. Yesterday, you directed that we should do an amendment. These are joint ventures, these are contracts that we've entered into for us to be able to raise money to finance our budgets. Now, last year, which is 2019 that we're inside, 320 billion was provided for production sharing contract for us to finance the budget. Not one dime was gotten from those items. For this year, they have provided 160 billion, Mr. President. Mr. President, 160 billion, we will not get a dime. So what is the essence of entering into production sharing contract, which, like I said, has 4 components? What happens to the royalties? What happens to the taxes? What happens to the profit sharing formula? We are not getting this in. So I think that they should go deeper with NNPC. I'm happy that they've said it here. There's something wrong happening at the NNPC end. So if we enter into contracts with IOCs, whether it is joint ventures, whether it is production sharing contracts, and we're not getting one dime from any of them to finance our budget, what is the essence of staying in those contracts? So I think that the Committee on Petroleum Upstream and the Committee on Finance should join hands so that in subsequent years, because in 2021, they have provided 320. 320 we will not get. In 2022, they have provided 425 billion. We will not get a dime. So I think that these are items that the committee must critically look at for us to be able to address the issue of budget deficit. Finally, Mr. President, now we have a budget deficit of 2-point-something trillion here. I think that, as far as I'm concerned, that deficit is far more than that, because most of the items provided in the budget to finance those deficits are the items I've mentioned, and we're not going to get any time. So what we have eventually is to have a deficit that is more than the 3% threshold provided by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And so the chairman of finance, I think that you should critically look at the deficit. Deficit is 2-point-something trillion. But you have provisions of 160 billion. You have provision for joint venture cash calls. These are money you are not going to get. All those money are going to add to the deficit, and it will become unsustainable. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 provides 3% threshold. What we are going to have will be far more than 3%, which means that the budget ab initio is not going to be implementable. And so I think that while discussing this, there's a need for us as a Senate to look at these areas so that the President will be properly informed while bringing the budget, so that he knows that what he has presented here is not exactly what the outcome might be. So, Mr. President, I want to thank you for the opportunity and ask the Committee on Finance to look at those items that I have mentioned, because they are critical to the budget implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have written the names down. So once you have raised your hand, I have written the name. But let me correct an impression. We can get the 160 billion naira provided in the production sharing contract, provided we are able to amend the PSC Act. And this is one thing that we are determined to do. We have already taken the first reading this morning. We are going to fast track the process, and I'm sure the House of Reps will do the same, and the President will assent to this so that we get the 160 billion. So we hope that we are all determined to follow that route and ensure that we don't allow the country to lose 320 billion for this year, 2019, and lose 160 billion for 2020. Distinguished Senator Abaro Jibrin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Senator Abaro Jibrin. I represent Kano North. Mr. President, my comment will be very brief. First of all, let me commend the Committee on Finance and the other committee that did this job, concerning the time frame, very short time frame that was available to them. They did a good job. But let me say that we need to put all the people involved in the oil sector on their toes, so that we'll be able to realize our oil production target, because this is very, very important. If we do not actualize this very, very important target, then the whole budget will be a mess. So I want to call on the committees that have oversight jurisdictions on the oil sector to really do their oversight properly. Besides that, the Finance Committee also has done well, but after the passage of the budget, the whole budgetary exercise, the Finance Committee should strengthen its oversight, monitoring activities, so as to make sure that, for instance, Mr. President, look at item 33, MPC JV crude oil and gas profit oil. This year, 2019, 670 billion is going to be realized from that item. But it has now, it will come down in 2020 to 14 billion. I mean, how? Why? From 670 billion to 14 billion? So Finance Committee, you must find out why. Find out why has the figure, or why is the figure going to come down. And we can push them to realize more money there. And when we have this money, we can have this money, and then maybe we have supplementary appropriations to take care of the increase we are going to have. Because you can't explain why you have this kind of downward adjustment in terms of projection for this very, very important item of finance. Also, item 37, PSC crude oil and gas, new terms. 320 for 2019, and then coming down to 160, about a half. So why should that be so? So finance also do a good job there. Find out why all these things are happening. I mean, MPC has to be transparent. There should be transparency in the activities of MPC. You can't begin to do, you say you are going to get 670 in 2019, and then all of a sudden 14 billion. So I think there's something wrong there. There's something that finance, you need to tighten your oversight activity to make sure that all these things are being, we should know, the country should know. The National Assembly has to know why this kind of change, monumental change. I'm happy that our deficit has come down, even though because we are not borrowing much like last year. But I'm not happy that the capital side of the budget is coming to just 21%, and then the current going so high. Of course, it's because we are not borrowing much, but when we go in there, make sure that we harvest all the revenue that we are supposed to harvest, block all the leakages, we have more money. So I think I'm looking at a situation where the government will come back having gotten all this money to request for supplementary appropriation. So, but all depends on you. You need to tighten your oversight activity to make sure that we harvest all these funds. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ibikule Amosu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ibikule Amosu, I represent Ogun Central. Let me commend the Committee on Finance for a job well done, particularly considering the time that it has taken them to get this report out. Let me say that this Senate, or let me say the National Assembly, I think we have both the yam and the knife in our hand here. The picture that is painted here, yes, it may look gloomy, but truly, if we do what we should do, which is what we are doing now, I think we will cross that Rubicon that we have all envisaged and what we are all clamoring for. When you look at all the numbers, you will discover that they negate all accounting postulates. And unfortunately, when you look at the cost, the expenditure side, you will discover that once it is probably 1 billion this year or 1 trillion this year, it will keep increasing. Whereas the revenue side will be decreasing. So you ask yourself, why is it that on the expenditure side, the thing keeps increasing? And on the revenue side, we should accommodate all the shocks coming from the expenditure side, they will be decreasing. Then there's a problem. Because if you look from 30 down, all of those indices, you will see that our revenue was going down. And I know that if you look at the corresponding expenditure, you will discover that they are going up. I listened to Senator Susan saying that our debt profile is on the increase or it's probably rising. Yes, I agree. But debt on its own is not the problem. One, if you look at even our debt and GDP ratio, even what you said, 19 going to 25, I don't think it's bad in itself. No, it is not. It is not. Indeed, having deficit budget is not a bad thing in itself. If you look at states in Nigeria today, the state that is most indebted is Lagos State. Yes, but equally, the state that generates more than anybody else is Lagos State. So clearly, what one should do is to make sure that, yes, as you are now going ahead and increasing your expenditure, you must now increase in maybe 2, 3, 4-fold your revenue, which is what is lacking as a nation, which is what we are doing. And I'm happy that this is not praising this administration, but we must say it. Just this morning, there was a motion on pirate attack, and I heard that for 17 years, the Port Harcourt to Bonny bridge, it's been left there undone. Indeed, in 2003, we went to Bonny from Port Harcourt. I couldn't come back. I have to get a chopper to take me back from Bonny back to Port Harcourt. And people live there every day. The enabler of any development of any economy is infrastructure. So I am happy that for once we are facing this infrastructure squarely. If you look at today, you will see that the second Niger bridge is receiving attention. The Bonny bridge that she's talking about is receiving attention. Yes, we are saying that, yes, we need to probably increase the funding, but where will the funding come from if we do not increase the revenue that we are generating? I realize that we have about 1.7 trillion. With what we saw in this report, custom is generating even more than what they budgeted for. So clearly, we make some savings there. That savings will reduce whatever shortfall that we have. And I know, and I'm happy the way Mr. President spoke just yesterday, we dwelt on it, that we cannot continue to be here and not correct this production sharing contract with our IOC. That's a cash is there. Some people are just smiling to the bank with the money, and Nigeria is suffering. So we must expedite action on that and make sure that we quickly right this wrong. And of course, the PIB, as all of those must be sorted out. And there's one thing that we are not talking about, and we are talking about it, but we should probably dwell more on it, and that is diversification of this, our economy. There are nations there, they don't have oil. What they generate, just yesterday I was reading that the governor of Zamfara or somewhere said that even a loan, Zamfara, a loan on mining can generate in excess of maybe $400 million every year. It's a fact. We should look into those areas which will give Nigeria that advantage, and we should get out of this monolithic economy that Nigeria is presently. If you look at the numbers here, you will discover that over 50% of all our revenue still comes from oil. And the foreign exchange is about almost even 90% of all that foreign exchange that we generate. So clearly it tells us that something is wrong with our economy. But I'm happy. The enabler, if you look at whatever indices, researches, empirical, you will discover that the enabler of any development is infrastructures. Infrastructure will not just be about, it will be totality of everything. Intermodal transportation, all of these things that the government is doing now, that is what will give us the development that we desire. So I want to urge our colleagues here, all of us, we should be in sync with one thing, and that is the fact that all the things that will increase the revenue of the nation, we all must come around together to speak with one voice irrespective of our party, which is what we are doing here. And I'm happy that this chamber, we are all in sync with the fact that we must just find a formula to increase our revenue. If our revenue is increased, we will not even need to be borrowing. And if we must borrow at all, it will be for a genuine reason for capital development, for infrastructural development. All the problem we are having in all the other sectors, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's even be it in all these social services related things. If you don't have money, we are no magician, you cannot give what you don't have. If the government doesn't have money that they will use to spend, that they will need to spend on all these sectors, then we'll just be chasing shadow and be saying the same thing. I am happy for one thing. When I look at this report, I realize that, of course, this committee has beamed their searchlight on all the MDAs that are generating revenue agencies, which is very good. We must not limit it to just saying, NNPC. No. We must ask ourselves, why is our mining sector not working? Why is our agricultural sector not working? And these are areas where, aside from what we generate, it will create huge employment. It will reduce, by extension, all the security implications that were negative implications that is happening throughout the length and breadth of this Nigeria. So, Mr. President, in supporting this, I am an incurable optimist, and I believe that Nigeria will be great. We are already on the path of greatness. All of us should play our part, and I'm happy with what we are doing here. So, Mr. President, in supporting this, again, I'm calling on all my colleagues. We should immediately make sure that we correct this production sharing contract with all our IOC. We should look into other areas, mining, agriculture. They are there, left on tap. Whatever infrastructure, whatever investment that we need to do, we must do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senate Leader.
No, well done.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I rise first of all to commend the Committee on Finance and Committee on Planning, for this wonderful work that they have done within the very short period of time that has been available due to the need for us to consider this MTEF and get it out of our way in order to receive the budget. I wish to congratulate the committee for very good work done. But, Mr. President, the issue about the economy itself and its trajectory, I'm very happy that Senator Suswam laid his hands on the fundamental issues. And the fundamental issue that we are facing, that this economy has been facing in the last 20 years or more, has to do with the issues of debt to GDP ratio and the transparency in the major areas where the revenues for budgeting come from. Mr. President, to me, the real challenge that we have is to grow the economy. Because only when we grow the economy can we collect the revenues that this country requires for its development. The major linchpin, the major trouble with the Nigerian economy is that we are not capable of getting revenue out of about 130 trillion GDP. Well, this country has about 130 or 140 trillion GDP. But out of this, we can hardly get 6% as revenue. OECD countries or medium-level countries of the same kind of economy with Nigeria get about 20 to, the least we get about 15. So what is happening? The problem really lies in the fact that we have not been able to make investments in the real sectors that raise revenue and the quality of life of our people. We have not really gathered the will to invest in the real sectors of the economy, agriculture, manufacturing, that are the major areas where we create jobs. And it is through job creation that you can raise revenue. Now, the issue of debt that distinguished Senator Suswam raised can be even seen much more graphically if we compare the debt to revenue instead of debt to GDP ratio, which appears to be at 19%, and we think we are okay. No, The issue is that you can see this much more drastically if you look at debt to revenue ratio. How much are you getting and how much are you borrowing? We are borrowing about 2.something trillion to fund this particular budget, while the revenue that we are getting from the budget is not more than 6 or 7 trillion. Now, when you take 2 out, that means that about 30 or 40% of the entire revenue that you are collecting, you are also borrowing money on that basis. So it's not just 19%, you are talking about something in the region of 40%. Now, the major issue is that this has not been, is not the situation that has started today. This has been what has been going on for a very long period of time. Now, to me, you're looking at the macroeconomy. The challenge really is not just at the executive arm of government. Over the years, I think we in the National Assembly have always thrown the case to the executive. I think we have to come in back and look at the issue of revenue raising here, because we are the ones who are responsible for making the laws that force institutions to collect the revenues that they are supposed to collect. We are supposed to do our oversight in order to make sure that transparency in revenue collection and revenue generation and revenue, getting the revenue to the federal treasury is done by all the institutions that are supposed to do their work. So therefore, the issue, my own question, Mr. President, I am very happy that you raised the issue of this production sharing contract and the bill that is now before us. We should frustrate that. But going forward, I think each one of our committees, every committee that we have that is oversighting institutions, will have to go back and do a very thorough examination of the function of the agencies that are under their oversight, so that we can be able to look into the ways and means in which we can be able to make sure that they do their work transparently, and then also to ensure that the revenue that are supposed to accrue to the government for the operations of those institutions is deposited with the federal government. Therefore, it's not just a question of the executive doing what, the executive doing that, but I think we also in the National Assembly have to come and do our own work to make sure that there is transparency and to ensure that we are able to fund those institutions that can help grow the economy. Therefore, I think the Committee on Petroleum, the Committee on Finance, we should be the driving force in all this revenue drive, and other committees, particularly committees in solid minerals, agriculture, commerce, industry, and manufacture. These are committees that should really stand up and do the necessary work. And that necessary work is that we have to use our legislative and oversight functions to make sure that the partnership that we want to build with the executive arm of government will also come and do our own job in growing the Nigerian economy. Because it's only when we grow the economy that we can reduce debts, and that also we can get the revenue for development. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
The Deputy Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleagues, my name is Senator Emmanuel Boacha. I represent Taraba South. Mr. President, my commendation of the committee flows from the fact that they submitted a report at a very good time, even when we verify this paper to them. I am worried by the aggregate consideration of both micro and microeconomic indices as x-ray by one of our colleagues. It actually portrays a very hopeless situation, but hope cannot be lost. Why I say this, Mr. President, the purpose of every fiscal strategy paper is to restore hope to a nation. And I have no doubt if we work harder, we have a great opportunity to restore hope for our people, because the purpose of this, all of this, is to put food on the table of the common man. and to ensure that there is an enabling environment for us to eat this food. I cannot agree less with the Committee on Finance on this report that touches on the secrecy that is demonstrated by the most important revenue agency, the NMPC, in terms of disclosing revenues of the oil sector. I agree, because if there is no secrecy and everything is done transparently, we'll have been able to explore how we will channel these resources to critical areas that will improve on the well-being of our people. I want to say, in view of the fact that there is stability in the exchange rate for the past few years, of course, but we still need, Mr. President, as a nation, to improve on the strength of the naira. I think we need to improve on this. But I must commend the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. President, for getting involved in areas that ordinarily would have been done by the Ministry of Agriculture, for example. And this has yielded quite positive results in a number of things. And I want to add, Mr. President, that the benchmark as it stands now wouldn't have been bad if it is raised to 60, in my own opinion. $60, $60. But, Mr. President, I know we are doing this of expectations ahead. There is no fear about what is happening in the Middle East or in Europe or globally, so to speak. But I want to believe it is okay if we will have a general understanding on what we have now. There is nothing to worry, but there is a lot of fears, a lot of concerns in the horizon on the general atmosphere of corruption. How? If we say we will go on borrowing, are we going to channel these funds that we borrow through appropriate means that will benefit Nigerians? The greatest challenge is when you borrow and end up pilfering that money that you have borrowed. That is our worry. No nation that does not exist on borrowing. I agree, quite all right. But my worry here is when we borrow and the money ends up in private pocket. That is where we will discourage continuous borrowing, because we will be enslaving the future of our children that are yet to see the light of the day. I want to encourage an increased tempo of the fight against corruption, because this revenue that we generate internally, if they are going to be used effectively, deployed effectively, we will have no need to encourage borrowing. There are a lot of measures that have been taken of recent that, if properly deployed, may help us a great deal, because we're a nation that is scampering for survival. Scampering for survival in the sense that we are battling to live. The security challenge is our biggest problem. You need to be alive before you talk about growing an economy. If you grow an economy, to feed who? When people are being killed left, right, and center, who are going to benefit from the growth of this economy? This is one big question that we'll raise. So what we project in the security sector should also be paramount in consideration of this paper. So, Mr. President, I want to add my voice to my colleague who did a very good job in x-raying this budget from a very technical perspective. And I want to add that let us also do our bit and see how we can come out with a good position that will improve our economy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Brown Gobir.
Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, want to use this opportunity to actually congratulate the Finance Committee. In fact, not only the Finance, but the Planning Committee, even though they have not been able to receive this paper until now. But of course, we can understand the kind of urgency that this requires, so I think that there will be no problem. But generally, one thing that stands very good here is the issue of non-oil income. The revenue that has been increased about 2.3 from 1.8. But of course, there is need here to look at the situation very carefully, particularly when it comes to realization of this, because there is need for actual diversification to take place. There must be import substitution so that we can know those industries that are actually having problems. We try to revamp them and then make sure that they are doing very well. In an area where we said only 1% of the consolidated revenue fund is going to be used to finance health, I think it needs a lot to be desired, of course, because this is not enough. If you look at the United Nations suggestion, they talk here about certain money to be realized on privatization, even though we don't know the kind of industries government parastatals are that to be privatized. But I think there is need to privatize that because of their problems, because most of them are money bound, so there is need to get them sorted out. We also have to commend the customs and exercise because of what they have done by generating about 557 billion over and above what they are supposed to do. Yes. So that has actually given us about 367 billion that will go for the capital. Even though still with this, the capital, we have not been able to achieve what we want on the ratio of about 70 to 30 or maybe a little bit higher than 21% that we are getting now. Because if we don't get capital much higher than the recurrent, then it means that we are not going to have growth. I mean, we may have growth, but there will be no development. Then, in fact, I wonder why we have to raise this from 10 trillion to 10.7 trillion. Because that will be an increment of about 729 billion, which is really too much. I just finished discussion with the leader on the issue of borrowing in this country. For me, honestly, Nigeria is under-borrowed, and we can borrow more money. There is nothing wrong with borrowing money. But the only thing that is fundamental here is to actually know what to do with that money. It must be project tied, like they said here. And therefore, I support that idea. The only thing you cannot do is to borrow money to finance consumption. That one is actually not correct. You cannot do that in economic terms. So for me, really, I think it is important if we can try to diversify the entire economy. Because diversification means that you will look at every other area, that's the non-oil sector, to be producing more and more into the economy, so that at the end of the day, we will be better off for it. But the fundamental issue here lies with the oversight. Our people have to be very vigilant, do the oversight correctly, as it should, so that we can be able to check the excesses of leakages, if any, from any area, so that we can be able to move forward, particularly from the MDS and parastatals, because those are the areas where we run into some problem. So with this, Your Excellency, I support this single-handedly.
Very much. Senator George Thompson Sekibo, JP.
Thank you for addressing me well, sir.
Very well.
I'm Senator George Thompson Sekibo, CON. I represent the Rivers Central District. Mr. President and my dear colleagues, Well, first I have to commend the committee that has turned out this report to us in this graphic form. Graphic form because we can pick words, we can pick figures to enable us to talk. Mr. President, I have looked at MTEF several times on this floor, especially in this administration. But pardon me, I'm not talking as somebody who is in opposition. I'm talking as somebody who has some problems, fears for the country. I will take from page 7. As at May 2019, gross oil and gas revenue, what was realized was 2.16 trillion as against 3.88 billion, billion, as against 3.88 billion. It means that in the first 5 months, there was a shortfall of 1.72 billion. If you look at it properly, that is how the summary went on till we come to the head. There is no subhead where we expected X and we are able to have X at that given period. If you come to page 10, Mr. President, starting from item 14, federal government expenditure 10.00 trillion. Total recurrent non-debt 4.84 trillion. Personnel cost MDAs 2.67 trillion. Capital expenditure 1.87 trillion. We all know that the budget of 10 trillion for the Nigerian people will be a wasted budget. A wasted budget because where every Nigerian man in my own village is expecting to be recognized is the capital expenditure. And there we only have 18.77%. My thinking is this: if these figures are sacrosanct, Committee on Finance, otherwise there is a need to appeal to make some level of increment for the capital project. Because for the capital project to be just 18% of the total budget is flatful. So I'm thinking that we need to look at that area and see. To service the operational system of government, 4.84 trillion. Personnel costs, understandable. So whether it's possible to look at the current expenditure and close down some areas and then get some chunk of money and transfer to the capital budget, so that the Nigerian people we are serving will have some benefit and know that we are really implementing the budget. I did not see one item here of the items that are listed out here. You resolve to about 19 items. I want to put a 20th one, if it's possible. It recovered looted funds. Because virtually every year in the papers here and there, we are hearing they are recovering money. Either they are recovering money from abroad, they are recovering money from those who were corrupt and all that. It may not be a very big amount. It could be just 10 billion or 20, I don't know. I'm not an accountant. But I think that we should be able to also reflect and make us know that those money recovered from those who are corrupt are properly accounted for and are also brought forward in the budget. The third issue I want to talk about is the production of oil. knowing that that is the main source of our income. We have said 2.3 million barrels per day, and we got 1.8. But the committee has now recommended 2.18, 2.2, 2.3 for the years 2020, 2021, and 2023. Mr. President, I think that if we put our security system properly and then have a better way of managing to know our production, this country in 2020 can produce more than maybe 3 to 4 million barrels per day. Because I am informed from my research that we lose close to 100,000 barrels every day. Even the VP, sometime in June, stated that the first half of the year we have lost 22 million barrels of oil. So if you look at it, it means that we are losing a lot. And the only way to be sure that we don't lose much, so we get more money, is to secure the oil facilities against pilfering, against theft, against vandalism, and against explosion. If you have a system that many other countries are using to manage their oil business, digital systems, that it can be in your house and be monitoring what happens in your pipelines, and so on and so forth, I believe that we will be able to do much more than what we are doing. What we are looking for is more money. And if you are looking for more money, you have to increase your production and then block every area where pilfering is taking place. Block every area that is leaking. So for me, we have to look at that area very well. The last one I want to mention about is, I'm now supporting the committee. The committee frowns at the attitude of CBN for the under-disclosure of the e-collection of stamp duties. They have done much of that one. Sometimes we don't understand whether the central bank is Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Water Resources. They get up and award, give loans, give grants, and all that, things that government in the basin will likely be doing. But I think that the committee has to go back and look at these records very well and see how much money has been made between now and when we talk about the budget, so that whatever they have made, they should not just arbitrarily be spending it. Let's bring it and include it in the budget. So we have much more money, increase the capital project funding, and then maybe reduce borrowing. Finally, Mr. President, when a man thinks about begging and borrowing every day, there's a problem on him. Look at it very well. Any man that thinks about borrowing, that can borrow from my brother to sustain the feeding in my house. Because when we even borrow, sometimes we get worried whether the money we are actually put into what it was borrowed for. I think most of the borrowings are attached to specific programs. If we are borrowing and we specify them to specific programs, then I'll be comfortable that, look, we got the rice meal from the money we borrowed. We did the Lokoja Abuja Road from the money we borrowed. When we just borrow generally, and it's not fixed to be a specific project, it becomes a problem. By the time you know yourself, you might use a borrowed fund to pay salary. That is eating in the house. You might use borrowed fund to pay computer for workers in the office or to buy stationery, and that is a borrowed fund. And if you look at the budget very well, throughout most of the period where we are talking about this budget, there is always a deficit in the total budget. After we even have borrowed, it means that as a country, we are not working hard enough. We have to work more to get more money for this nation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. We have a list of 20 or 21 senators who have signified interest to speak. So I will urge us to limit our contribution to 3 minutes maximum. The Chief Whip, please, you keep the time. Next is Senator Ayo Akinye-Lure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, my name is Distinguished Senator Ayo Akinye-Lure. I represent Ondo Central. Mr. President, from the look of things, and from what is presented in empty, it is important that we know that this 7th Assembly is for serious business. Our 9th Assembly is for serious business. Sorry, please. We must change the narratives of our budget. It is important to note that revenue projections under the budget has been grossly understated. Particularly, Mr. President, the issue of stamp duty collections by CBN. That's the area I am particularly concerned, Mr. President. If the CBN governor is only just providing only 200 billion from stamp duty, in a country we believe that we can realize minimum of 2.5 trillion revenue from that single source, then it calls for questioning, Mr. President, that item need to be thoroughly investigated. Only provision of 200 billion was made for stamp duty for 2020, then 350 billion in 2021, and 450 in 2023 projections. Mr. President, in a year alone, the collection from electronic transfers, when you look at the number of transactions on yearly basis, is over 7 trillion transactions from this particular source. This particular item was to be investigated, but the CBN governor has made it practically difficult, even for the consultant appointed by Mr. President on the inception of this administration, to collect 20 trillion revenue lost on stamp duty alone. So making a provision of only 200 billion is just like say, go and take it on his own discretion. Who is running the country, Mr. President? We have Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces under the leadership of President Muhammad Buhari. With that presidential directive, the CBN governor has not complied till now. From stamp duty source alone, Mr. President, we can fund our budget comfortably without borrowing. Why must we be borrowing? In the midst of plenty in this country, we say we are borrowing. Borrowing what? So the agencies of government that is yammering for revenue generation, when they get this money, they spend it. The chairman of finance committee and the members, we are up to the task to call this thing to order. We are not borrowing. Before the end of before the passage of this appropriation act of 2020, we must be able to discover the loopholes that we need to finance our deficit budget, Mr. President. Secondly, Mr. President, the issue of double exchange rates need to be investigated. There are a lot of frauds when you have multiple exchange rates to a dollar. To a naira, to a dollar. We have 305 as a basis for the budget. But not even who wants to import goods to this economy or do productive activities will be made to buy dollar at the rate of 357 naira. That's an increase of about 52 naira. This has given room for a lot of fraud. And people who don't work at all become billionaire overnight by allocation of exchange, dollars to them, and they make 15 naira, 52 naira, but for doing nothing. Mr. President, I think the Senate of the 9th Assembly have a duty to this nation that we don't need to borrow money to fund our budget. Mr. President, in line with the determination of this present 9th Assembly, under your leadership, Mr. President, the review of a production sharing contract, we are determined to make sure that it's completed before the end of this year, before the passing of this particular budget. If that is done, Mr. President, then the money realized should also be used to reduce the deficit budget and again increase, funding our capital infrastructures. In Nigeria, we don't have good roads, bad roads, no light, nothing. We can't fix it. These are where our revenue, there are loopholes in the revenue collection revenue that, makes it impossible for us to realize enough to fund our budget. Finally, Mr. President, I want to submit that the collection machinery of stamp, the cost of collecting this revenue is at a very zero level, that is stamp duty. And I believe that that single action alone by the Finance Committee to probe to the bottom will help a lot to assist us fund our budget without resorting to borrowing. I so submit, Mr. President. Thank you.
Distinguished Senator Betty Apiafi.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, my name is Betty Apiafi. I represent Rivers West Senatorial District. I'm from Rivers State. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, a lot has been said about issues of revenue and the non-declaration of proper revenue by revenue collecting agencies. And I'd like to point out that the Finance Committee, in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance, may need to come up with templates on revenue collection for most of our MDAs, so that we actually know, because you go to different MDAs, they categorize their revenues differently. So there's need for us to have a template for that. A lot has been said about revenue collection. I don't want to go through that route. I want to go to the route of expenditure, cost reductions. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, there's a question that keeps bothering my mind when I'm going through this document, and that's the vexed issue of fuel subsidy. I'm actually quite surprised that in this entire document, nothing is said about fuel subsidy. Fuel subsidy has constituted a major expenditure in this nation. And just like the Finance Committee has said, that a lot of the issues about NMPC is shrouded in secrecy, so also is the issue of fuel subsidy. How much have we really spent on fuel subsidy this year? How much did we spend last year? What is the impact of fuel subsidy to our budgeting process? Of course, fuel subsidy is one of the major reasons why we can't fund our budget, and we don't know how much that is. And this whole document doesn't say anything about fuel subsidy. So I'd like the Finance Committee to go back and look at that issue very well and say something about fuel subsidy. Then finally, I'd like to talk about, this is a strategy paper that will define this administration. It would be good if most of the monies we have borrowed are tied to projects, so that at the end of it all, we look at ourselves and say, yes, we borrowed this money, but we use it to do this particular project. And that's where I'll end my discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Senator Adedayo Adeye.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Senator Adedayo Adeye, representing Ekiti South of Ekiti State. So I want to commend the committee for a good job within a very short time. And I also want to commend the executive for bringing this on time. I think Nigerians will be happy with the new spirit of the spirit with which we now work in the National Assembly. I am not comfortable as a fiscal conservative with the issue of debt. I think the debt profile of Nigeria is already getting too high at $79 billion. But what is even more worrisome is the rate of growth of the debt, which is about 12.5% per annum. We need to look at that, be mindful of that. Debt per se is not the issue, but if it is getting beyond your capacity, like the Senate leader said, the matter, what we should be concerned about is not the debt to GDP ratio, but the debt to revenue ratio. And if you look at that one, it will mean that we will be finding it very difficult to meet up with our debt obligations in the future if we do not begin to stem the rate of growth of the debt, of our debt. But the good thing is that Nigeria has a great potential to pay this debt. If only we can plug all the leakages, all the loopholes from which our revenue is draining. People have mentioned the PSC, which will tidy that up within this year, and I believe that will add to our revenue profile. The issue of some of the activities of the MD is being shrouded in secrecy. If they are opened up and we're able to collect all the revenue from that, mining sector, we discussed it yesterday, is an area that is played with chaos at the moment. So if we are able to put that sector in order and the government is able to generate revenue from there, it will also add to the collective, increase our revenue. Agriculture, this government has done a lot and is doing a lot in the area of agriculture, reducing importation and increasing local production. We should now be moving gradually in the next few years to even exportation of food. So with that will also add to our revenue. And then when we increase manufacturing, it will also add to our revenue. So it is not the debt per se, but the fact that we need to plug all the loopholes and then increase our revenue profile. And I think that should be the focus in the next few years. So I would suggest that in going forward, the government, and particularly working with National Assembly, to find a way by which we can stem the rate of growth of our debt. This year alone, we are going to spend 2.45 trillion to service our debt, whereas we are going to borrow only 1.7 trillion. So even the rate, already the amount of money we are using to service the debt is more than what we are even borrowing now. So we need to reduce the rate of growth of our debt. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Senator Suleiman Abdukari.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I join my other colleagues in commending the good work of this ad hoc committee. And in doing so, Mr. President, as the finance, budget and planning committees of Senate. And in doing so, I would also want to lend my voice to the idea of revenue generation, Mr. President. We should all see ourselves and other MDAs as revenue generating agents of government, because we are all in a hurry to increase our spendings, but the expenditure should usually be considered as we go borrowing, because what we have already before us on the strategy paper is we are going to receive a deficit budget. And since this deficit budget must be financed through borrowing instruments, I would want to recommend that a more structured capital market instruments be explored, because we would, in government doing so, and today in Nigeria, the number one borrower is government. When this is done, it is crowding out the SCA, small and medium scale enterprises. And banks are more comfortable dealing with government because that is a guaranteed source of payment. So I would recommend that the government explores more of capital market instruments, and Sukuk is one of the options, which is not very expensive and they are very affordable. Mr. President, the growth rate of Nigeria is also not very desirable, because we should do more in the area of investment in infrastructure, because it is only that which secures more economic growth and SMEs are better encouraged. And from the proceeds of SMEs, we receive what can be termed as incomes from the government through taxation. And when this is done, it is hopeful that the government will achieve more and more revenues will come in. Mr. President, let me observe that what bothers the common man on the street is not what we sit and speak about here, but how does our action convert into things that he can see, touch, and feel. For instance, we should be able to have something that ensures social mobility being passed in this Senate. We should, for instance, at the end of the day, be speaking about how many jobs have been created in a particular year. How many people have moved from the lower income class to the middle income class of the social strata of our society. So as we speak and deliberate further on this fiscal strategy paper, I would recommend that we focus more on provision of education, health, and youth employment, as we have already stated. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Senator Dino Melaye.
Mr. President, my respected colleagues, Dino Melaye, Kogi West. Mr. President, I want to join my colleagues in appreciating the Committee on Finance and indeed the leadership of the 9th Senate for the fastest reports on any MDA, on any MTEL since I got into the National Assembly in 2007. Mr. President, I will not want to be judged this morning as a member of the People's Democratic Party, but I will want us to put up our cap of reasons to judge me as a patriotic Nigerian, as a concerned Nigerian, as a worried Nigerian, as one who wants the life of my grandchildren that I may never know have a life structure for themselves through the instrumentality of MTEF and budget planning. Mr. President, borrowing is not a crime. Borrowing is not problematic. The problem is what you do with what you borrow. Mr. President, regime after regime, government after government, we borrow in this country, but it is laughable and ridiculous. It is outrageously calamitous that we are borrowing for consumables. It is unacceptable that we are borrowing for recurrent. No responsible father will borrow just to feed the family. I think in the Senate and under your capacity leadership, Mr. President, we must enact a law in the National Assembly that will forbid the federal government from borrowing for other purposes. If we want to borrow, it must be 100% for infrastructure. And, Mr. President, and if we do that, we would have helped this country. We would have helped generation unborn. And I'm excited, I'm happy that by the grace of God, we must drive to logical conclusion the steps already taken in this very positive direction. Mr. President, my second point is on the convergence of the exchange rates. There is a need for us to converge the exchange rates. This multiple exchange rates is a lie, it's fallacious, it cannot take us anywhere. Mr. President, in a country where some people get exchange rate officially for 370, and some anointed and favored people get it for 305, can only breed injustice, can only promote corruption. We must have a convergence of exchange rates. We must make sure that the multiple exchange rate is, the law promoting that with the CBN is amended so that we can, with sincerity of purpose, of heart and commitment, promote promote justice and abolish round tripping. Mr. President, I also want to say that there is a need for us to enforce the application of ICT in oil production and management in this country. That is the only way to check corruption in that industry. When we do not apply technology to our per day production of crude oil, our sales of crude oil, it will continue to be shrouded in secrecy. Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, even Ghana have technology, and through ICT, they can sit down anywhere in the world and know their oil production and sales per day. But we have continued to refuse to implement that in this country because we want to continue to promote corruption. Under your leadership, I want us to make sure that the relevant committees make sure that this technology, which is just an app, it is not a miracle, it is not a rocket science, it's just an app. And once it is installed, it will curb corruption in the industry. Finally, Mr. Whip, I also want to say that, are we working for excess crude when we can increase our benchmark and then increase our expenditure on capital and infrastructure? We rather want to reduce the benchmark so that excess crude can grow. Are we working for excess crude in this country? And one would not even know how the excess crude is being expended. Finally, Mr. President, finally, on this document, if you look at item number 33, Mr. President, and this is in reaction to the presentation of the chairman of the Appropriation Committee. 33 there talks about the NNPC JV crude oil and gas profit, the profit oil, which Honorable Senator Barrow is disturbed that it reduced from 670 billion to 14 billion. Truth be said, Mr. President, that money was spent by the federal government. And from my investigation, I stand to be corrected that it was spent on projects that are not appropriated by the National Assembly and this country. So, I stand to be corrected, and I stand on this, Mr. President, that this money was spent on projects that were not appropriated. So I'm calling this attention, the attention of the Finance Committee, because we must, this is not a community meeting, please, this is the Senate. Mr. President, I am saying this because there's a need for the Finance Committee to look into this and make sure that, because it is I think Senator Barrow is as disturbed as myself to see that drive, so that it will be corrected subsequently going forward. I thank you, Mr. President, and thank my colleagues, and I wish us well.
Thank you very much. Let me correct an impression before I call the next speaker. Distinguished Senator Dino Melai, what we have is still an allegation. The chairman, the Senate Committee on Finance is here, Appropriations is here. If you have any evidence, these committees that are available to you, you can share your information with those committees. Thank you. Distinguished Senator Engineer Kabir Barkia, Katsina Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, I am Senator Engineer Kabir Barkia, Katsina Central. Mr. President, let me commend the Joint Committee for a good job. And also, I want to draw our attention under recommendation, that's page 15. The committee recommends marking 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to finance the Basic Health Provision Fund to be classified as statutory transfer. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, of course, it's good to have a good health care and also to have a good education. At least we have certain amount also earmarked for education from federal revenue through the church fund. Mr. President, if we look at our infrastructure, of course, we have terrible condition of infrastructure, Mr. President, whereby nothing is earmarked. So it's high time we look at this important sector, Mr. President, especially road sector. Of course, it's good to have a good health and also good education. But if the infrastructure is bad, what will happen? Just last 2 months, Mr. President, a motion was presented here that a professor of medicine and some lecturers were traveling from Abuja to Kaduna, Kano, and they involved in accident in trying to dodge potholes and die. So at least those people who are healthy and they have good education, but they went and died on roads, on bad roads. So therefore, Mr. President, it's very, very important we look at how we could also find certain percentage, at least to make sure that our roads are reconstructed, rehabilitated, and also maintained. But because just budgetary allocation, Mr. President, is not enough. It's very inadequate to maintain or construct our roads. Therefore, I'm calling on this committee also to look at it, whether it is from federal revenue or maybe from the consolidated, to have also certain percentage to take care of our infrastructure, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Senator Owele Anayo Rochos Okorocha.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very all-important topic. My concern this morning, Mr. President, is I do not know what we are doing differently today in the 9th Senate from what you did in the 8th Senate and what you did in the 7th Senate, 6th Senate, and so forth and so on. And if what we are doing today is similar to what we did in the 8th Senate, then be rest assured that the product will be the same. And what I mean by this is, I said to you severally on this floor that if we keep doing the same old things, the same old ways, we shall keep getting the same old results. And I pleaded with you just 2 days ago. I said, Mr. Senate President, change your style. Let's change our style. And if we change our style, we'll get a new result. Again, I reminded all of us.
How do we change our style?
Mr. President, that we are the pivot upon which the wheels of government must rotate. Sometimes we'll blame executive or judiciary or ourselves, but it's what we'll give to the executive they will do. They are waiting for us. So the failure of the budget or success of the budget depends on this. Let me come to what we must do. And this is how I want you to really conduct this assembly, that when we stand up to talk, let's provide solution. Not creating more problems for executive, but let's provide what do we have different to show. Mr. President, the problem that we have here, and summary of all we've been talking about, is money. That we don't have enough money for our need. That we don't have enough funds to support the needs of Nigeria. to create jobs and put food on the table of the common man. It's our problem. And this problem arises from the fact that we depend on one source of income, which is called oil, which constitutes over 50% of our revenue, apart from customs, and 90% of our foreign reserve. And this same oil is static, is in fact reducing, while the population and our demands are constantly increasing in a geometrical progression. So oil will not meet it. So, first and foremost, a people like us now faced with this kind of danger should look inwards. And I say to you, let's cut our coat according to our material available, not according to our size. I've said this severally. Nigeria's budget is being cut according to the size of Nigeria, not according to the material available, resources available in Nigeria. And I'm coming to the solution. So what we need is number one. Right. Chief Whip, you have no whip in your hand, so you cannot whip anything now.
I think you addressed the chair, and I will give you 1 more minute.
Solution number one. There's need in cutting our coat to make sacrifice. Mr. President, let me even start from here. Let me give you a typical example of how to run this year's budget to achieve our targeted goal. Here we have 3 senators per state. In that National Assembly over there, we have 360-something energetic human beings in this very building, small building. This country must begin to make sacrifice and cut down on cost of governance. To start, very painful as it might be. Now, our constitution provides that we have 3 senators. What is the 3 senators per state doing that 1 senator per state cannot do? Hold it. Now, what are we doing in the National Assembly there that we have 360-something people? And each of these persons creates demand on the system. We must cut down on the cost of governance. The second point, Mr. President, let us, I know you won't like this, but...
No. I think you can round up. In fact, because you are saying something so important, I'll give you an additional minute.
What we need to have under the present ugly situation, which our constitution points out to us, is to have a senatorial representative, 1 per state, and senatorial 3 per federal constituency, to reduce cut of distance. And secondly, Mr. Senate President, is to fund the productive sector of our economy. Government is business. Government is business.
Now you have to round up, honestly. Yes. Okorocha, I think our colleagues have been very magnanimous. We have a long list of our colleagues who want to speak, so you have 30 seconds to round up your contribution.
I have some enemies of progress here. Mr. President, okay, let me summarize. The point I'm making is our Senate, this red chamber, must never operate our budget from an accountant perspective, but an economist perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think definitely. But let me say that your contribution can be translated into a bill. If you want a state to have only a senator, it requires a constitutional amendment. So you have the opportunity to present a bill to seek for the amendment of the relevant section of the Constitution that provides for 3 senators per state. But I think my personal opinion is The National Assembly, the legislators here, both Senate and the House, are tasked to think deep, to think wide on how we can generate more revenues, on how the revenues we generate, no matter how big or small, are prudently, efficiently, and economically applied. And that requires total, comprehensive, and holistic oversight on the executive arm of government. This is something we must do, and we must not fail in that. Thank you. Distinguished Senator Stella Odwa, Distinguished Senator Mohamed Sani Musa.
Thank you, Mr. President. My distinguished colleagues, I wish to join the others in commending the Committee on Finance for presenting this framework. My area of concern is on the stamp duty. Almost every Nigerian pays stamp duty, one way or the other. If I look at line 137, where you see the stamp duty in a federation like Nigeria today, collecting only 24 billion. I mean, ordinarily, the banking sector, one of the banks should be able to declare that as stamp duty that have accrued to federal government as just the source of that. But if we are putting something like this in the framework of what our budget estimation will be, I think there is more to it. And the Committee on Finance, I think they need to go deeply to find out how our stamp duty is being accounted for. Because stamp duty is a proportion of whatever consideration that an instrument is providing. We have real estate, we have oil and gas, we have even the NCC, communications, our transactions in the banks, we pay stamp duties. Our companies paid stamp duties proportionately to your capital, to your paid-up capital. So I think that is another source that we should check and make sure that all the revenues that have been collected in the name of stamp duties are being accounted for. And that will also augment the budget. But as it is today, there is something going wrong with the collection of stamp duty in our country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Deputy Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I am Aliu Sabi Abdullahi. I represent Niger North. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, permit me to align myself with previous speakers in commending the very thorough and urgent work that the Joint Committee of this our distinguished chamber did to make this particular report available to us. Indeed, the findings and recommendations are very thoroughly thought out, and my concern here will be that as we deliberate the content of this report, we should continue to also think deep, especially as we're going to be receiving the component of how this elaborate report will be implemented as it affects Nigerians through the appropriation bill that will soon be coming to us. And I'm saying this because as much as it is trite for us to make expenditure in infrastructure, have roads, have other critical infrastructure, health, education, and the like, there is a missing link in terms of our human capital development. And this is worrisome because no matter how good you have a road, if those who are going to use the road have not been properly schooled or trained, for example, you are talking about road safety. Yes, people will argue that accidents are caused because the roads are bad. But at the same time, those who get license to drive vehicles, how do they get it? This particular element of human capital development in terms of the skills, the attitude people bring, is also very key, because this is where we run into a lot of wastage. If you look at the recurrent expenditure, one needs to ask, what is the productivity of a worker that is paid and given a particular bit to watch over for this country? And I think this is where the core issues are, and I want this night Senate to look at this particular issue and align it to our charge with respect to oversight, so that when we go to oversight ministries, departments, and agencies, we should begin to look beyond the physical development that happens in those MDAs to how the recurrent expenditure we are incurring is actually helping to turn the physical development into productivity for this nation, so that with it, employment can be created for our teeming populations. The other point I would like to make, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, is the very noble idea of dedicating a particular amount for our primary health care. Here also I'm worried because I recall in the 8th Senate, in this hollow chamber, we looked at the issue of medical doctors who wants to do housemanship, and the fact that there is no space for many of them. The effect is that many of our doctors are doing what we used to know, the brain drain. And I recall just recently, there is an association of student doctors who are crying that there is need to pay attention to how they do, what do they call it, the housemanship. So the point I'm making here is, when we have these health centers, who man them? These are the points we need to take note of. Are we going to leave it for donkeys and animals to occupy, or are we going to be able to put it to good use? This is the point I want to make, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. And I think the other point has been made by my brother, the issue of the e-stamp duty collection. I think going forward, there is need for us to delve into this area, so that, just like we have done with the Treasury single account, I think there is need to bring some of these things under some arrangement that is similar to the Treasury single account, so that we will be able to block leakages and guarantee additional revenue to the economy. With these few comments, I thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues.
Thank you very much. Senator Aishatu Dahiru Ahmed Binani.
Thank you, Mr. President. Aisha Dair Ahmed Benani, representing Adamawa Central. Mr. President, I'm looking at this. I want us to look at this document that was shared to us. I believe the recommendation, the documents which the report of the Finance Committee was basically from these documents that came from Mr. President. Mr. President, in line with what Senator Dino said, I will only raise two or three issues. Sharp. If we look at page 9 of this document, Mr. President, table 4.2, revenue performance, January to June 2019. You will see that the net oil and gas revenue, approved budget 7.6, pro rata 3.8, then the actual 1.5, and then you have variance of 2.2, deficit of minus 59%. That is the revenue performance. Then if you come to page 10, federal government expenditure performance. It's saying federal government because this is budget for federal government, not the national budget, because the national budget includes for state and local government. So federal government expenditure performance from January to June 2019. You see that recurrent expenditure 6.3, approved budget. Pro rata 3.1, then the actual 3.1, you have 0.0%, meaning there is no deficit. The meaning is that we have borrowed so much to finance that minus 58% as we are today, and we are yet to begin to even implement the capital project or human development. In line with what Dino said, there is no harm in borrowing. What the report from the Finance Committee said, we can borrow as high as 59% of our gross revenue generation. But when you borrow, if you borrow to finance capital projects and human development, there is no harm in that. But when you borrow to finance recurrent expenditure, I think we are going down the drain, no matter the revenue we are expecting. That is one. Mr. President, I would want the Finance Committee to look at this document, this item number 15. Says repayment arrears, and you can see that there is being ascarized. So if you come to the last page, and there are huge figures here. If you come to the last page, come down, you see that relates to oil production volume, the proceeds of which will be applied to repay the arrears of JVC cash costs, and hence not available for sale to fund the budget. Please, the Finance Committee should shine its eyes and look at it critically. There are some of the accounts which I would want the Finance Committee probably to help in explaining. There is this on this table 4.4. You see actual balances in special accounts, which you have some figures there. That's page 10. Actual balances in special accounts. Federal government in special levies account, probably when taking our comments into consideration, all this will be looked into and probably explained. The most worrisome of all, Mr. President, in all these documents, from this to the one produced by the Finance Committee, I've not seen much about security. I don't know if it's being hidden or concealed, or that's how it is designed to come. So, and I'm really worried because right from the inception of this Senate, we've been talking about insecurity challenges and how to forestall that. And this MTEF is the basis and the bedrock for our budget. And there is nothing except the police that I've seen 1% that should go to police, except that I don't know if any senator have seen anything regarding security in both this submission as well as the one from the Finance Committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Yaro Binos.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, my name is Binos Yaro, Adamawa South. Mr. President, I rise to join my colleagues in commending the joint committees for a job well done. Personally, I was not expecting them to finish this work within the time frame they use in doing it. So they deserve our commendation for this expeditious work they have done on this MTEP document. Having said that, Mr. President, I must put on my accounting cap to make my remarks, not an economist cap, and say that I am worried that from the documents prepared by the Finance Committee, we may not realize the amount of revenue budgeted for 2020, because up to this point, the reports we get is that both oil revenues and non-oil revenues have fallen short of budget. Having said that, Mr. President, it is also worrisome that of the total revenue we are expecting, almost the entire amount is going into recurrent expenditure. If you look at page 10, where we have a summary of the expenditure, we have personnel costs of 2.67 trillion, total recurrent non-debt 4.84 trillion, and special intervention recurrent 350 billion, all added up to 7.86 trillion, which is a little bit higher than the 7.7 trillion revenue we're expecting in the year. In other words, the entire revenue collection of the federal government is going to be spent on recurrent expenditure. That is highlighted by the releases that have so far been made for capital. For capital, we are told on page 8 that only 294 billion naira has been released for capital projects so far. How then can this country grow? How can we renew our infrastructure if every money we are making, we are consuming it? So, Mr. President, my view is that we must dedicate part of our revenue for capital expenditure. And we must start, and that is using my accounting hat, from revenue to expenditure. So that if we have, or if we are expecting a revenue of 7 trillion, we must say, what of that amount are we dedicating to capital? Because what we are doing now is the only thing that we are using for capital is the little amount that we are borrowing. So, Mr. President, there's a need to rethink our framework for preparing our budget and to focus on the deployment of the funds to the various sectors so that capital must be given a priority if we want to renew our infrastructure and we want our country to grow. Thank you.
Senator I.D. Gyang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remain Senator I.D. Gyang, representing Plateau North. I rise to lend my voice to this very important subject, the medium-term expenditure framework for 2020 and 2022. Let me start by commending the committee for this work that they've done and the recommendations that they've come up with. I want to take a look at the sectoral ceiling that has been provided, particularly the provision for security, which is at 17% of the total budget size for 2020. With this provision, the expectation would be that the entire security architecture of this country would receive attention with this provision of 17% of the total budget size to address this issue of insecurity in our country. This provision also reflects the cost of insecurity. That is aside from loss of lives and property, what it is costing the nation. And by this, we hope that the security agencies will be equipped and empowered to effectively tackle the issues of insurgency, terrorism, kidnapping, banditry, and violence that is all sorts of crime and criminality. I also want to appreciate the 1% that has been allocated for basic health care. And this will go a long way to address the dilapidation of our primary health care centers. And I would want us to follow this provision with a legislation that will require a counterpart from states, just as is being done with basic education, so that we can strengthen provision that will give and provide basic health care facilities for our rural dwellers and our people in the grassroots. And to finally say that the debt justification that has been provided to the fact that Nigeria's peer group nations are at 56% of debt GDP ratio, the essence of it will be that we must target our own debt to the productive sector that can subsequently and eventually provide sources of revenue that we can use in repaying the debts that we so incur. And I want to say that I'm glad that the Ninth Senate is living up to the agenda that we debated yesterday, coming up with this MTF and debating it in record time, so that we can meet up with our desire to change the budget cycle from January to December. I therefore say that this is in the spirit of our desire to meet up with our agenda to give Nigerians a new budget cycle. Thank you very much, distinguished.
Thank you very much, distinguished Senator Gesham Basi.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Gesham Basi, and I'm the senator representing Cross River South in this assembly. Let me first of all, commend the Finance Committee and the leadership of the Finance Committee in particular for a very thorough and well done job. I think that the speed with which they have produced this document, although I'm a member of that committee, so I think I'm commending myself as well, has been something that we encouraged, and I commend that committee. There are just two issues that I want to raise on this document, which I think we need to look at, Mr. President. The issue of economic growth. We have seen an economic growth figure here of less than 3%. For a developing country, 3% economic growth, or 2.87, whatever it is poor. It's not good enough. This has not been the figure that we were looking at as a developing country. Normally you would hope for, China has growth rates of 5% and 6%. India has growth rates of 9% and 10%. So for an for a developing country that wants to get to where we want to get to, a 2% or 2 to 3% economic growth rate is very poor. So what does this mean? It means that we need to invest more in this economy. It means that there have to be more capital inflows into this economy. It means that the amount that we're spending on infrastructure, security, and other vital, critical areas must be increased. But where is the money? Where is the money? I want to propose, Mr. President, that the money is there. Very quickly, if we raise the oil benchmark from $55 per barrel to $65 per barrel, bearing in mind that the average price of crude oil has gone from $60 a barrel to $70 a barrel, we easily realize enough money to begin to invest in some of these critical areas. So my proposal, sir, is that the Finance Committee considers raising the benchmark for crude oil from for the purposes of this budget, from $55 a barrel to $65 a barrel. You have enough money to begin to invest in infrastructure, in security, and in other critical areas. So that is my contribution today. I think those are the areas that I wanted to touch on. The area of economic growth and the area of the crude oil benchmark. Thank you. I so submit.
Thank you very much. Last but not the least, very distinguished Senator Samuel Egu.
Thank you, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues. Mr. President, I want to join others in appreciating the committee for the job they submitted to us, and also to comment basically on an issue that I found here that gives me some worry. Generally, we know that government is trying to raise money either by borrowing or increasing our IGR through taxation. And in all this, I see a situation where if care is not taken, suffering of the people will increase. And as much as possible, it's our duty in the Senate to find ways to reduce this suffering. And in their document, on page 15, item 14, where they talked of the call for amendment or review to the FRA Act and the various laws of the revenue generating agencies to align with current realities. What are these current realities? In my own thought, I feel that they want to still make the laws that will still increase the taxation of the people. But in doing that, in as much as it may sound very nice, we have to remember that there are some people that are not privileged, especially the small and medium entrepreneurs and individuals, school leavers, young graduates who want to start their own business, who wants to stand on their own because they may not get the white-collar jobs. By the time you review the laws more than what is happening now, I believe the people who want to stand on their own will further again go down the drain. Let me give an example. Currently, the revenue generating agents, especially the federal revenue, the FRS, they will come to a small company, a small business, and they will just give estimated taxation without knowing whether the company is even breaking even. And they also have in their law that when you get such taxation, you don't need to complain. If you complain, before you complain, rather, you must pay 50% of the fine they gave you before they will listen to you. Who does that? How can the country survive under that situation? Somebody is trying to survive, you give him an estimated bill of maybe 500,000 when he cannot even break even. And you ask him not to complain. If you want to complain, pay half of that amount before you complain. So I think that in a situation where they want to look at this review, they should remember that there are some people who may not be able to stand on their own. And I think for us to grow as a country, we should rather encourage people who want to stand, who want to do businesses, and not to use taxation to kill their initiative. Already we don't have power. They also run on generator, and other means. So people should, in our effort to raise funds to keep the country going, we should remember that there are some people that need to be encouraged for them to stand on their own. Mr. President, that's my submission.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. We'll go to the recommendations now, and we have 16 of them. I will put each recommendation to vote. So the first recommendation is the adoption of 2.18 million barrels per day as daily production output in 2020. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 2 is the adoption of $57 per barrel as crude oil benchmark price for the fiscal year 2020. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 3, the revenue target of Nigeria Customs Service of 942.6 billion naira for 2020 should be increased to 1.5 trillion naira. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 4, the sum of 557.4 billion naira from the revenue increment of Nigeria Customs Service be used to reduce borrowing by 200 billion naira and increase capital expenditure. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 5, the exchange rate of 305 to the dollar should be maintained for economic stability. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 6, the saving on income accruing from the increase of the benchmark amounting to 172 billion naira, which represents the federal government portion of the $2 added to the benchmark, be used to pay salaries and emoluments of the proposed 30,000 new employees. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 7, that proper investigation be carried out on the e-collection stamp duties domiciled with the Central Bank of Nigeria for the past years, so as to show probity and accountability, and of course increase the revenue base of the country. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 8, the immediate amendment of the National Assembly Act on Production Sharing Contracts, PSC, with the IOCs. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 9, that proper investigation be carried out on NNPC so as to ascertain the actual costs associated with joint venture agreements. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 10, that more government-owned enterprises budget be added to the nation's budget to ensure proper checks and balances among all federal government agencies. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 11, the Debt Management Office, DMO, should put more efforts and strategies in managing the foreign and local debts. Those in support of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 12. The total estimated expenditure of the federal government should be increased from 10.002 trillion naira to 10.729.4 trillion to 10,729 billion naira. Say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 13. The National Assembly should expedite action on the passage of the finance bill, which will bring along with the national budget into law for easy implementation of the 2020 budget, most especially in the area of those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 14. The committee calls for an urgent review amendment to the FRA Act and various laws of the revenue generating agencies to align with the current realities. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 15. The committee recommends earmarking that 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund to finance the Basic Health Provision Fund to be classified as statutory transfer. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. And recommendation 16. The committee recommends the adoption of 1.5 trillion naira as the amount for new borrowing as a result of reduction of 200 billion naira, which was sourced from the increase of revenue target of the Nigeria Customs Service. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Distinguished colleagues, let me join all of us in thanking and commending the joint committee that considered the MTF FSP, especially the committee leadership, in distinguished Senator Solomon Adiola Olamilekon, for a very wonderful job. I know that the committee, since we referred the MTF for them to work on, they have literally moved into the National Assembly. I can recall that I spoke with the chairman at 1 a.m. This morning when he was still in the National Assembly complex working on this report. This committee has done quite a good job, and in a very hard and tough and determined and focused way. I'm happy that we're able to pass the MTF. We are optimistic that next week we'll be receiving the budget in the joint session of the National Assembly to be presented by Mr. President. I've also listened to the debate. Let me say that a lot of work rests squarely on our shoulders, the National Assembly members. We are supposed to be thinking of how to generate more revenue. Let me also say here that we have to task the Federal Revenue Service. The number of Nigerians, both personal or individual and corporate, that are in the tax net is still an infinitesimal percentage of the entire population. I think the Federal Revenue Service should be tasked by our Finance Committee to widen the net so that more taxpayers are brought into the tax net, and that is one way of ensuring that we get more revenues. I also believe that we have to diversify the economy, like many of us did mention during the debate. Definitely, this mono economy is not going to work for this country. It has not worked really, because we have not been able to put our revenues into the proper way and form of ensuring that we develop our infrastructure. We have lost so much ground over the years. Time has come to diversify this economy. Oil is becoming something else. It is not going to be a darling of anyone. Perhaps the greatest users of our oil will stop even buying the oil. So we need to have an economy that provides jobs for everybody and create wealth. And that is to diversify in the area of agriculture, to diversify in the area of solid minerals, to diversify in the area of tourism. And we have a chairman of tourism who is energetic, who is determined, who is focused. Distinguished Senator Rocha Sokorocha, the tourism sector in Nigeria can do very, very well. We expect that you will turn around that particular sector. we believe that we can get a lot from that, but we also believe that we must ensure that our procurement process is properly monitored. This is one of the highest in the world, probably where people could, in other countries, could obtain something for 10 million naira, maybe in Nigeria is 30, 40 million naira, almost 3 or 4 times. I think it's for the legislature to say no and do the proper thing. And this budget should give us that opportunity. We should be able to say that this is not the right cost or price of an item. And we will be saving, because in a situation where we have to borrow and borrow, we should not allow the country to suffer. You borrow and then you fund or you over-invoice or over-inflate the cost of projects is causing us so much harm as a people. And I believe that our committee should be able to, during the budget defense, look into this, ensure that procurement is done in such a way that is helpful to our country. There must be efficiency, there must be prudence, there must be economy in the way and manner we do procurement. I mentioned this in the presence of the ministers then nominees before they were sworn in, that what we are going to do is to ensure that if 10 agencies will be buying a set of computer of the same brand, it has to be one price. It can't be 10 different prices for the same model or whatever it is. And we have to ensure that we do that. When we do that, we'll be saving some money for our country, and we will reduce the deficit in one way or the other. I also believe that we need to look at the passage of this production sharing contract. We have already taken the first reading. I believe that it is doable that by next week we should be able to pass that bill, and we then ask the House representatives to concur with it. That is, if they are not considering it, we fast track it, and I'm sure that the President will be so glad to pass it, because this is one way of ensuring that we have the 160 billion naira as a source of funding realizable. We have probably lost the 20 in 2019 because of the no review of this particular act. So we have to do that. I believe that we have most of the responsibilities to undertake to ensure that this economy works, that as representatives of the people, we know where the shoe pinches even more, because we are in a constant interaction with the people that we represent. The one thing that I want to ask the committee chairman is, the customs have done so well, and I will join the others, our colleagues here, to commend the customs. But there is no reference, no mention of the performance of the other or the remaining revenue generating agencies. Mr. Chairman, you and your vice chairman, you have not told us the performance levels of the remaining revenue generating agencies. You only said the customs did well, they surpassed what was given to them as a target. It is one thing that we have to really pursue. From now on, I think maybe on a quarterly basis, we have to bring the revenue generating agencies, like you did yesterday, and continue to review their performance, because there is so much maybe leakage in the system, and maybe because we are not stiff with our oversight, is giving the agencies some opportunity not to even be accountable. So we need to have regular engagement with revenue generating agencies, and where we think they are not doing well, we must say so. If it is something that the National Assembly can correct, then we correct. If it is something that we have to change the laws that establish, then we should do so. We shouldn't shy away from that. And that takes me to the need really to review the acts establishing the various agencies of the federal government of Nigeria. Today we have over 600 of such agencies. Many of them have outlived their usefulness. Maybe they were set up specifically to tackle or address some emerging issues at that time. Today, those issues are not there, and they are still being given some money, allocated budgets, and they hardly add any value. I think the time has come for our committees to look into the establishment acts of all the agencies that we have under the control of supervision and oversight of any committee, and see where agency is still relevant. Maybe we look at how we can make that agency more effective and efficient. Where an agency has outlived its usefulness, we should be considering the streamlining of such agencies with those that are relevant. I think there is need to cut cost, there is need to save cost, there is need to be prudent, especially when we are faced with the lack of revenues in this country. With this, let me thank everyone like I did and at the beginning, the Senate leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, the second order of the day is a motion requesting the Senate to consider the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, for the confirmation of the nomination of Mr. Adeleke Moronfolu Adewolu for appointment as the Executive Commissioner of the Nigerian Communication Commission, NCC, in accordance with Section 8.1 of the Nigerian Communication Commission Act 2003. Mr. President, distinguished senators, the purpose of this motion on the order paper is for the request of Mr. President to be referred to the relevant committee for further legislative action. I therefore move that the Senate will consider the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, for the confirmation of the nomination of Mr. Adeleke Moronfolu Adewolu for appointment as Executive Commissioner of the Nigerian Communication Commission.
Minority Leader.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise to second the motion that this Senate consider the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, and the confirmation of appointment of Mr. Adeleke as Executive Commissioner of the Nigerian Communications Commission in accordance with Section S1 of the Nigerian Communications Act and for possible referral to the Communications Committee. I so second.
Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. The request of Mr. President is hereby referred to the Senate Committee on Communications and to be returned in 2 weeks. Well, the chairman is not here. Who is the deputy chairman of the Senate Committee on Communications? He's not here, Senator Ibrahim Bomay. Then any member? Yeah, okay. You have 2 weeks to screen the nominee and report back to the Senate. Leader of the Senate.
Distinguished colleagues, having gone this far and having considered our MTEF and fiscal strategy paper and knowing that there are Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, I beg for your pardon and I ask for some patience before we close. I want to use this opportunity to go to the third order of the day, which is a motion standing in the name of Senator Abdullahi Sankara and 26 others on the menace of street begging and the need to rehabilitate street beggars. Mr. President, you may wish to invite Senator Abdullahi Sankara to move the motion.
Senator Dalladi Sankara Dallatu.
Thank you, Mr. President.
As usual, my name is Senator Aladi Abdullahi Sankara, representing Jigawa Northwest. I stand to move this motion. The menace of street begging and need to rehabilitate state beggars, sponsored by me and 28 co-sponsors. The Senate notes the concern, the exponential increase in the scourge of street begging and the nuisance it constitutes on the streets of major cities across the country. Aware that though street begging is a global urban problem, the situation in Nigeria appears intractable and overwhelming, as beggars are now found everywhere, especially at motor parks, religious centers, road junctions, venue of ceremony, and other public places. Observe that in the past, beggars are persons with physical and mental challenges or grossly indigent. In recent time, there appear to be a new vogue of beggars in town, derisively known as corporate beggars, who take advantage of the sympathy of the society for the less privileged to remain jobless and at times perpetrate crime in the name of street begging. Regret. Well, for example, the system that produces almajiris is still very much in existence. Its economic support tools have largely been discarded with the neglect of the government. Acknowledges the street begging not only affects the geographical and social structure of urban areas, it also portrays the country in the bad image of tourists and foreign visitors. Concerned that the street begging is a worrisome socio-economic challenge, in addition to being a serious menace and liability on the Nigerian populace, as it takes a heavy toll on the lives of teenagers who either act as guide to beggars or even engage in the act themselves and therefore are out of school. Accordingly resolved as follows: call on the federal government to formulate policy that will integrate almajiri into the educational system, thereby discouraging them from being used of street begging. And number two, call on the federal government and state government to set up vocational training center to provide beggars with alternative means of livelihood, thereby making them useful to the society. I so move.
Distinguished Senator Robert Borofez, the Deputy Leader. Raise your hand. You didn't? Oh, you raised his hand. Okay, Deputy Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I am Dr. Aliu Sabi Abdullahi, Niger North. I rise to second this very, very important motion as ably moved by distinguished Senator Sankara Abdullahi. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, there is nothing ambiguous here. Street begging is a very serious issue. And perhaps we may even want to add corporate begging, because beyond the street begging, we are also having corporate begging. And you will notice that almost every government office or commercial place you go to, you see very well-dressed people popping in and doing the begging with some style this time around. And so I want to commend the mover of this motion and to say that we must rise up to do something about this. We know the culture of begging came about through the Almajiri system, and it is simply something that, let me say, time has outdone it, and I think it is time for us to review. However, in doing this, one way or the other, we need to recruit the support, the collaboration of our various scholars, particularly the Islamic scholars, so that we can decide how best Islamic education can be given to our young ones. The idea where a child is taken away from his parents, denied the love of his parents, denied the care of his parents, and placed under somebody who himself is struggling to take care of his own self and even his family, is not sustainable, is cruel, and the result has been that most of these children don't end up having that same Islamic knowledge that you want them to have. A simple test in some places of asking the child to even recite some verses of the Quran will shock you. So what is the use of a system that is meant to impart knowledge on a child, which turns out to make that child a victim of cruelty? Just recently, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the case in Kaduna State where children and some adults were caught, more than 300 people, the condition that was shown to the world does not mimic the condition where somebody can study. So I think we need to remove the chaff from the grain. We are not saying Islamic education is not important. It's very, very important for those of us who are Muslims. Ditto, even in Christianity, that you should have the knowledge of your religion. I don't think anybody is against that. But what is worrisome, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, is to allow this system to be abused by very wicked souls among us, who use this to exploit these very innocent souls who could have turned out to be the great men and women of our dear country, Nigeria. And I think if we can do something about this, it will be a very, very welcome development. Now, with respect to corporate begging, distinguished colleagues, it's a serious issue, and I'm sure even those of us in the National Assembly, we are not free from the menace of corporate begging. People you don't know from your constituency, you don't just pop into your office. When you know fully well that you are here to represent a particular senatorial district, and different people come in, not because you even know them, but they see because you are a senator, and they come in to just tell you that they have a problem they want you to solve. Some of them will even break down crying in your office. You don't know how they even come into the premises in the first instance. So, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the import of this motion is not lost on us. It is a serious matter, and I urge my colleagues to support wholeheartedly.
The Deputy Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleagues. Mr. President, let me add my voice to this very meaningful motion. I appreciate my colleague from Jigawa. The issue raised here is quite weighty in trying to sanitize our system. Mr. President, the menace of begging is a huge burden on us as a nation. and it also defines the level of our development and civilization. To add salt to injury, Mr. President, in some situations, in urban centers in this country, you find where institutions, because they fail in their duties, some of these beggars also rise to help them. I was so embarrassed where I met a lame beggar in the traffic, controlling the traffic because the traffic warders were nowhere to be found. One, besides the institutional failure, it goes to say begging also should be legalized, since they can also partake in some of these functions that institutions should carry out. And passers-by were dropping money to them. This is truly very, very disgusting and nauseating to say of this, of a nation like Nigeria. It's very common all over the place. And it's not to say that we do not sympathize with their situation. No, it's far from it. Everybody should have where he should stay. Everybody should have his abode. If there are miscreants, some probably even who had received bullet wounds from robbery, because you won't know what is the cause of his disability. And that is why such things should be discouraged, and we should rise up and ensure that, particularly the FCT, because the FCT is the image of our nation. And the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory must ensure that these beggars are off our street for our good. This is very important because it defines the level of our civilization. An outsider who comes will first describe Nigeria from what he sees in Abuja. So, Mr. President, I think the motion is quite important and apt at a time we are battling to defend ourselves from being a world capital of poverty. So this is very important.
Rocha Sokorocha.
Mr. President, first let me thank Senator Sankara Dalatu for this humanitarian motion, which must be coming from a man that cares. Mr. President, anytime we hear of beggars or see beggars, one thing is certain, that all is not well with those group of people who have resorted to stand on the street under sun and rain to ask for arms to survive. Therefore, begging is not a profession. And for beggars, I classify them as those group of Nigerians who have looked at every alternative of life and none has worked out, including robbery or something, and have decided to just walk on the street and beg. Dr. Sankara must have said this because he must have seen most of these things happening in our society. But I must request, Mr. Senior President, that we must do something as quickly as possible to support and help the beggars on the streets, especially in the northern part of this country, where begging and illiteracy has become a combined factor. My suggestion would be in this motion that we have a lot of pastors, bishops, and imams and chief imams. The churches and the mosques will help us if government will give them some kind of support to take away these people, rehabilitate them, support them, make them better citizens. But if we think these people do not matter, let me inform all of us that they are getting aggressive day by day. When beggars beg nowadays, they don't beg just begging, they beg with authority. And if you don't give them, they knock on your door to remind you that you have done nothing. That is a bomb waiting to explode. So the earlier we tackle this, what we call menace, the better it is for us. And there are places here now in Gariki here. If you go with a good car, they puncture your tire. And when the puncture are tired, they ask you to pay for it. So begging is changing from please to you must. And that's the danger I see. So it's something that is very timely that we'll look into it. The issue of education, and especially the Almajiris, and I'm happy the Deputy Chief Whip has spoken on this matter. I personally have experienced this. And this is, I just want to appeal to Nigerians that number of beggars we have in the streets, say they're not more than 5 million, 10 million, 2 million, 5 million, 3 million. And we have more than 5 million Nigerians who can just pick one of them and support them. It will help. It's also a plea, not a thing of that you must. So I want to suggest that this motion, we're handling it, we should give tax incentives to charity organizations who are willing to take off these people from the streets and provide them a means of livelihood. If they do this, this will encourage more people to become philanthropic in taking these children out of this. It is very surprising that even some of us who have started to help, government charges rent, ground rent, CFO rent, when we are training children who are from the poorest of poor, these beggars, they still charge us fees. If there are small incentives.
Distinguished, you can round up because we are not extending time. And there are other senators who want to contribute. We have only 10 minutes to go. Thank you very much. Senator Elisha Clifford Ishaku.
Thank you, distinguished Senate President, my President, distinguished colleagues. I want to commend distinguished Senator Sankara, my elder brother, for this very thoughtful motion. But I will also urge him to look at this beyond just a motion, which is actually will end up in resolutions, and resolutions are actually advisory in nature. To actually prepare a bill, sir, Senator Sankara, sir, I want to encourage you to actually prepare a bill so that we can have a law in this country that will touch not only on the issue of street begging, but also touching on what the Deputy Chief Whip have just touched, the issue of the Almajiris, more especially in the north, whom I believe, and we have seen, that the earlier intention of the creation of the Almajiris, which has been part and parcel of inculcating Islamic religion on our younger generations, has been defeated in the north as it stands today. Senator Sankara, sir, as I said before, please prepare a bill so that it can become a law in this country on how we can support the issue of the Almajiris, support the Malams in the north, even giving them proper training, because we have seen in the past administration where mighty, gigantic schools were built in the name of Almajiri schools in the north, but today they remain abandoned, and in fact some of the buildings has become stigmatized. And I'm happy today that some of these structures are being taken over by LEA and being converted into proper LEA primary schools, where the Almajiris will go in there and get education, not in the name of an Almajiri school, but in the name of LEA primary school, where everybody can go in there and get education. While actually supporting this motion, sir, I am still appealing for the third time. Let us have a bill that will outlaw street begging, that will also support in rehabilitating street beggars
and making the Almajiris education in the north a proper education where they will even be given certificates. Thank you, Mr. Senate President. Thank you, my colleagues.
Let's go to the prayers. Prayer 1. Call on the federal government to formulate policy that will integrate Almajiris into the educational system, thereby discouraging them from being used for straight begging. Those in favor of this prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 2. Call on the federal and state government to set up vocational training centers to provide beggars with alternative means of livelihood, thereby making them useful to the society. Those in favor of prayer 2 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Distinguished colleagues, let me thank additional prayer.
Mr. President, I want to add a prayer that we should urge the minister to clear the FCT of all miscreants and beggars. That is the additional prayer I'm adding on this.
Any seconder? Senator Barrow Jibrin.
Barrow Jibrin, I stand to second the motion for amendment as ably moved by my colleague. I so move.
But before I put this question, it's not an amendment to it. While they are trying to clear people from the street, they should also try to create some environments where they will provide some opportunity for these people. Because if you clear them and there is nothing for them, they will still come back and brave the quality face, whatever it is. So I put the question, those in favor of the additional prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. I think the issue of street begging is a very serious issue, but I want us to see it beyond street begging. Today, the figures keep on changing. Some will tell you we have 11 million, some will tell you even 14 million children out of school. I'm sure that also includes those who are doing street begging. And street begging is not only Almajiris. There are people who are not Almajiris who are also involved in street begging. But what is crucial to us will be how to get these children, particularly off the streets, to go to schools. The idea of integration is very important, and I believe that that goes with some responsibility and obligations. The federal government and the state governments must work together to ensure that we provide opportunities for these children out of school. They are the children of Nigeria, and we owe them that, and it is important that this remains one of our agenda for this country to be safer and to develop, because it's a wasteful resource that we have in the streets, and most of them will turn into undesirable behaviors and attitudes, and maybe even into criminality. So it's important we stand up to deal with that issue. So I want to congratulate our brother, our colleague, Senator Adela Sankara, for this motion, and those who have contributed. Leader, can you stand down the remaining items on the order paper, please?
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, having gone this far, and given the fact that there are, on the order paper, there are about over 30 committees due to meet or currently meeting, I rise to move a motion for the distinguished Senate to stand down the remaining items on the order paper until another legislative day. I so move.
Minority Leader.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion as moved.
Those in favor of the motion say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Adjournment.
Distinguished colleagues, having come to the conclusion of today's session, I rise to raise a motion for the Senate to adjourn until tomorrow at 10 a.m. I so move.
Certainly not tomorrow. You will be the only one to be here.
Mr. President, very distinguished colleague, I think the leader will come here tomorrow to represent us. I'll ask to second the motion that the Senate do adjourn till Tuesday at 10 a.m. I so second, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Before I put the question, letter from Mr. President, we just received a letter, executive communications from Mr. President. Distinguished Senator Ahmed Ibrahim Lawan, President of the Senate. Dear Distinguished Senate President, presentation of 2020 appropriation bill. May I crave the kind indulgence of the distinguished Senate to grant me the slot of 14 hours on Tuesday, 8th October 2019, to formally present the 2020 appropriation bill to the joint session of the National Assembly. Please accept, Mr. President, the assurances of my highest regards as I look forward to addressing the joint session. Yours sincerely, Muhammadu Buhari. Thank you. The Senate is hereby adjourned till Tuesday, the 8th day of October 2019 at 10 a.m. prompt.